The housing crisis is getting so bad that it's starting to look like even homes in rural areas will become unaffordable in the near future. This is Ben Scallan and you're watching Gript Media. Before we start the video, if you want to support Gript on our work, make sure to click like, subscribe and comment, because by liking, commenting and sharing, this channel will get boosted in the algorithm and get seen by more people. And so if you want to see this channel grow, just take 2 seconds right now to like, comment and do your part to support independent journalism. And so with that said, on to the video. For many young people like me in Ireland, the countryside is seen as an escape route. Everyone knows at this stage that big cities like Dublin are jaw-droppingly expensive from an accommodation perspective, and if you ever want to own your own home and start a family, which many of us do, then you're faced with 3 basic options. 1. Get rich or save up for a remarkably long time until you can afford a place in or near the city. 2. Emigrate to another country with a less insane housing market. Or 3. Move out to rural Ireland, where house prices tend to be significantly more reasonable. Thankfully, option 3 is becoming a lot more tenable for young people in recent years, particularly with the advent of remote working and not necessarily having to be right next to your office at all times. So even if you have to have a job in Dublin, you can live in Offaly or Tipperary and benefit from those low prices without being stuck for work opportunities, or at least that's the idea. Anecdotally, on a personal level, I'm 25 and my wife is 24, and we absolutely plan to move to somewhere rural to start our family, and many of our peers are thinking along the same lines. Some have already bought homes out in the sticks and they're happy out. But will this plan be practical for long? Will rural house prices stay affordable, or are they set to go the way of the cities in terms of skyrocketing price? Well, according to one report, things may be on a bad trajectory. As reported by The Independent this week, middle and low earners will be priced out of living in regional towns by 2028. Higher prices, lack of new homes, and exodus of landlords makes a perfect storm. Many middle-income earners will be unable to afford to buy homes or rent in regional towns by the end of the decade, according to an unpublished report that paints a bleak picture of the future of housing affordability. It forecasts house prices in 3 Tipperary towns could increase by about 50% by 2028 based on 2021 values, while rents will also grow rapidly and undermine affordability. A property expert who has seen the report says its findings are likely to be applicable to most parts of the country outside of Dublin, because Tipperary is the typical Irish region. Now, while 2028 might sound like a far-off futuristic date akin to Blade Runner, remember that that's only 5 years away now. So if this report is accurate, then house prices near small rural towns could be out of reach for most people in the very near future. Of course, the explanation for why this is happening is not going to be summed up in a single pithy one-line answer. There are all kinds of factors that contribute to house prices, from immigration, of course, to tax, to energy and more. But when it comes to rural house prices particularly, a huge part of the problem is onerous planning regulations. I'll let independent Wexford TD Verona Murphy explain.
For a long time now, there's been a lot of disquiet in relation to planning regulation, particularly in relation to rural housing. If you're someone who has moved home to a rural area to work from home and you require a house that allows you to do that, you need to have a very serious economic need. So if you move from Dublin, you work for a multinational, the likelihood is that you won't be given planning. On top of that, we have the National Broadband Plan, which we're being told by one arm of the state is now being rolled out all across rural Ireland in the same way that electricity reached every home. And another arm of the state, in the form of housing, planning and local government, is telling us that we won't be able to build houses to access those services.
So if you could maybe explain briefly how you think that this could affect the lives of ordinary people on a day-to-day basis.
Well, we have a planning policy that's being put upon us, I suppose, really, that says we must live in urban density areas. And the policy is to build high density, high rise, in small urban towns with no rural dwellings. And I think it's wrong to force families into that type of setting where ultimately it ends up with antisocial behaviour because nobody wants to live in that setting, and it's not fair to force them into that setting. So if we get the typology that's envisaged by the planning regulator and the policy that's put forward, all we will have are terraced housing and 1 and 2 bedroom departments, and everybody knows that these densities and these typology of housing do not fit with low income earners. We have seen it all across the world, and as it stands, Merthyr Tydfil, which is a very densely populated high density housing area in Wales, the UK government have asked the Bath Institute to carry out a study as to why we have such low incomes, low levels of education in these areas, and I think that's what we need to look at. Ultimately, we have a Dublin central government, and we have had, particularly in the last election, and I think that's why rural TDs, particularly independent TDs, evolved so well in the election. We have many of our ministers are Dublin centric, and therefore our policy is Dublin centric, and they simply do not understand rural Ireland. You will have heard Deputy Danny Healy-Rae say that the planning regulator, he didn't know who he was, but he certainly felt he didn't know, the planning regulator didn't know Kerry, and I think that is part of the rural-urban divide here. As a politician, I would certainly be in favour of balanced regional rural development, and we're not getting that from a Dublin-centric government because they simply don't understand how we want to live in rural Ireland.
So in short, to sum up, planning permission is only really given for high-density urban dwellings, even in rural towns, so everyone needs to end up packed together like sardines. This is the vision that planning regulators apparently have for rural Ireland. This is pure speculation on my part, but one wonders, does this have anything to do with the green climate agenda? Because of course, if everyone is packed in on top of each other in a town, then they don't have to drive as far as if they lived out in some cottage in the middle of nowhere. So it seems plausible that central planners in Dublin want the whole countryside to be as packed as closely together as possible, thus creating this problem. And Murphy added that this would lead to a devastation of rural communities as a whole.
The reality is that we're going to continue to see a demise of rural Ireland. We will end up with nobody in our rural schools. We will see GAA teams not being able to be fielded because nobody lives there, and the ghettoisation of our towns and small towns in rural areas.
In the same vein, independent Offaly TD Carol Nolan previously hit out at On Board Planala for its agonisingly slow planning and appeals process, which she said left many people in a state of limbo, unable to build their own homes. She said that the problem showed a dysfunction at the heart of Irish planning law, and we know that planning rules are stricter now than they were in years past. So fundamentally, rural house prices are rising because there aren't enough houses to keep up with demand. And there aren't enough houses because planning authorities are over-regulating the market and only allowing certain types of houses to be built in certain areas, all because of some long-term social engineering goal that they have to make towns and cities and villages to their liking ideologically. This also explains why if you wander around in some places like Donegal, as I did recently, you'll see streets full of unused derelict buildings that people could hypothetically live in, but which are sitting idle and dilapidated instead, which is actually amazing because the demand for housing is so high in Ireland. In theory, it should be a great financial opportunity to build houses. In a normal market economy where there's a scarce resource that everyone wants, some shrewd entrepreneur or businessman will swoop in to reap the rewards of that situation. And yet in Ireland, people would rather let buildings rot by the hundreds than actually turn them into a house, because by putting so many regulatory hurdles in place, we've succeeded in making the construction of new homes an enormous pain in the ass and actually not worth it. When you think about any market economy, a guy whose job is to sell houses wants to sell one to you, obviously, and he can only do that if he sets the price at a level that you can actually pay and agree to. If Cadbury's could sell cream eggs for £1 million each, they'd happily do so, but nobody would pay €1 million for a cream egg, and if they set the price that high, then the company would go out of business, needless to say. So instead, they have to set it at a level that you are actually willing to pay. And similarly, when it comes to housing, the producers and the consumers want to make a deal here. The developer doesn't get any money by just hoarding houses to himself like a hobgoblin. He gets money by selling or renting the house to someone like you or me. And that's only possible if he sets the price at an affordable level. So the developer has built a house, you want to buy a house, you both agree on a price, and you're just about to shake hands and make the deal when suddenly in comes on board Planola or the local county council, slapping your hands away and saying, hold on now, I don't like where this is or the type of housing that you two have decided on, so here's a list of requirements as to how it should be. And so by adding in loads of artificial conditions, they end up inflating the price so much that you can no longer afford it, and you say, actually, never mind, we don't have a deal. And so the housing crisis continues unabated. And these policies have serious consequences for society, as France is now finding out the hard way. The French public are freaking out about President Macron's decision to increase the pension age due to that country's demographic crisis. But Ireland has a demographic crisis of our own as well. And the only way to avert that crisis without mass immigration is to increase the pension age, which nobody wants to do, or to have more young people working and providing for pensions and things of that nature through their taxes. And young people like my wife and I aren't going to stay in Ireland if they can't afford a home. People can't start families and produce more Irish taxpayers if they're locked out of the housing market. And without families, we end up with the social catastrophe seen in the streets of Paris today. The government needs to get real about housing in this country and learn a thing or two about supply and demand before the proverbial really hits the fan. Please like and share this video, and if you enjoyed it, please consider signing up for a monthly donation via the link on screen to help us produce more content like this. Alternative media like Gript needs all the assistance it can get, and every donation goes a long way. As always, thanks for watching.